Okay, chapter 18, the dike. The weather had gotten colder and colder. Mother Verhagen found so many starving strangers begging at her door that her supplies gave out. Would the war never end? People began to fear that liberation would come too late. And then, on Tuesday, January 30th, the Dutch newspapers carried a message of hope. Two Swedish ships had arrived in Delfzijl harbor laden with flour, peas, dried vegetables, margarine, cod liver oil, and milk powder. It was a gift from the Swedish Red Cross and would be distributed to children and hospitals. Unfortunately, the ships could not proceed further along the frozen canals unless it thawed. As if in answer to prayer, it began to rain that same evening. Shivering and starving, Holland rejoiced. A few days later, extra loaves were distributed on the rations. The population of the cities went wild with gratitude. It was as if there were no barriers anymore. Perfect strangers rejoiced together. Many prayers went up to thank God for sending this bread in Holland's darkest hour. On February 13th, more ships arrived from Sweden. This time, everyone got a loaf of bread and a package of margarine for free. To the Dutch people, those loaves came with the same message the dove brought to Noah. The waters of bitterness were receding. And meanwhile, it rained. The snow melted away and seeped into the ditches, which filled and overflowed. Mr. Verhagen was glad he had taught Hildebrand to help him. There was too much work for one person. The mill had to pump steadily, but it was doing its job. The grass in the Rheinstadter polder was no wetter than it should have been. It was a different situation altogether at the Noorderar polder. The shortage of electricity in Holland had assumed major proportions. Even those industries which had priority now found themselves without current. The rations of Noorderar mill received were negligible, and consequently, pumping stopped. The rain did not stop, however, and so the Noorderar polder was filling up. First, it changed into a muddy morass, and then presently there was only a blank sheet of water which reflected the trees and buildings and crooked gates which protruded from it. The Noorderar farmers were alarmed and indignant. Their houses, crops, and cattle were suffering. They were practically marooned in the shallow water. They complained bitterly. Mr. Tromp, the engineer who ran their pump, walked to Leyden to argue his rights with the electricity supply board. He found chaos. Crowds of people had arrived on exactly the same errand, and there were few officials to talk to them. Most of the members of the board were in bed with the dreaded hunger edema, a disease from which many had died. Mr. Tromp heard hair-raising stories of inundations and miseries in other parts of Holland and trudged back with the news that there was nothing he could do. The Verhagen family had just finished a meal of newly caught pike when they saw a procession coming into their dike, to the dike heading for the Watchman. In the front walked Mr. Schneiderhans. He was followed by other farmers of the Noorderar polder. There was a hangdog look about all of them. Sic transit gloria mundi, said Hildebrand, vanishing into the attic. Mother hastily carried the empty dishes to the kitchen while father straightened his tie and went to open the door to his visitors. Presently, the little living room was full of people. There weren't chairs enough. Some had to stand. Farmer Schneiderhans cleared his throat. Mr. Verhagen, he began, we've come to make a request. We believe it might be possible for the Watchman to drain our polder as well as the Rheinstadter. We're in a tight spot. If the water gets any higher, we're all ruined. We're ruined already, piped in a small farmer. The grass roots are dying, the potatoes are rotting. Father scratched his chin. He was trying not to feel triumphant that they had been forced to come to him, the old-fashioned miller, for help. It is not for me to decide, he explained. I'll notify the president of the polder board, and he'll probably call a general meeting of all the farmers of the Rheinstadter polder. It will have to be put to a vote. Mr. Schneiderhans looked worried. Perhaps he'd remembered the many times he had paraded his superiority of his polder. Perhaps he wished now that he had been less patronizing to the Rheinstadter farmers, since his wealth and well-being now depended on their votes. It was also possible that the other farmers had similar thoughts. How much time will that take? They asked anxiously. I'll see about it right away, Father promised. The farmers relaxed and accepted a cup of Mother's acorn coffee before they left. That afternoon, Father went to the general meeting at the polder house, and when he came back, he looked happy. We won, he said. They voted to help the Norderar farmers, but it was a tight squeak. Many were against it, and I can't altogether blame them. The argument was that the others had chosen electricity for better or for worse, and why should we now suffer to help them out? What did you say, Father? Asked Dirk-Jan. I told them it was their duty, that this nation had been built by Dutchmen cooperating against the enemy, water, their enemy, water, and they could not abandon the Norderar people. I also told them it would not be so risky. The Watchman is a powerful mill, and though our polder is only half the size of the Norderar, we have our lake, which gives us a far greater water capacity. Somebody asked, what if the wind should drop and the Watchman be stopped? I told them it was most unlikely in February with a southwest wind. So it is voted for, said Mother. They did. So they voted for it, said Mother. They did. Father smiled to himself in a pleased way. Will it make them change their minds, Father? Asked Joris. Will it make them stick to wind? It might, said Father, still with a pleased smile. It might very well if we do the job. And Joris thought to himself, well, do the job we must. Father started right away to speed up the mill by adding sails. Joris and Dirk-Jan and Hildebrand all helped. Now the mill wings were going very fast, and the Watchman trembled and shivered and shook, while the wings flashed in front of its own windows, and you could hear the water foaming out into the canal. We must be way below our water level when they open the dike tomorrow, said Father. So they were going to open the dike. Joris and Dirk-Jan were both silent with a kind of awe. All their lives, they had been brought up to respect the dikes, the bulwarks, which kept out Holland's greatest enemy. No sacrifice was too great to keep them in repair. And now one of the dikes would be pierced and the enemy would wash around their own mill. They were up early the next morning to see what would happen. The farmers of the Norderar polder were already massing at the corner of Mr. Corin's farm, where the dike would be pierced. They had brought planks, buckets, and spades. Many were wearing hip boots, for the water in the Norderar polder reached to their knees. They were in a great hurry to begin. Though it had stopped raining, the wind was blowing black clouds across the sky, whipping the water in the Norderar polder into wavelets with white foamy tops. Word had spread that the dike on Farmer Corin's land would be dug through. Many helpers were coming from the village. Engel and Dr. de Vries arrived with Rena, who hadn't gone home yet, for the food situation in Leyden was so bad. Hendrik appeared with Hans and Habel, who had been sent to the farm to recover from malnutrition. They looked ill, and Joris felt sorry for them. There was some consolation between There was some consultation between Father and members of the polder board as to the quickest and least damaging way to let in the water. There was a shortage of wood and other materials, which ruled out the most efficient methods. They finally decided on a cofferdam, which was made by hammering overlapping planks in a big V, closed at the tip by a single plank and based against the dike. That kept the Norderar water off. Now, women and children with buckets emptied the water inside the dam, and then the digging could begin. There was only a limited amount of space, so not everyone would be active, but most people preferred to watch anyway. More and more spectators arrived. This was the biggest thing that had happened to this village for a long time. It almost became a party. Women arrived with kettles full of synthetic coffee, like fake, like the acorn coffee, or hot milk. The sound of excited chattering could be heard from far away. Presently, the wind chased away the clouds and a watery sun appeared, shedding a half-ghostly light on the accumulation of people, all in colorful and odd clothes, milling around and chatting. Ari, Corin, Engel, Rena, and Dirk-Jan formed a group. I wonder where Leendert is, Engel remarked, looking around. You'd think he'd be right on the spot, but I only see Hendrik. He and his father don't get on, said Dirk-Jan. I doubt whether Schneiderhan Sr. wants him around. Leendert is shockingly rude to his father. He is looking very elegant lately, Rena remarked mockingly. I saw him wear a new pair of boots yesterday. He must be in favor of German authority, because they would give him gifts to help them and all, and money. Oh, no doubt they pay him. aloud Ari, but I don't think the Germans respect informers. They really admire patriotism. My grandmother had soldiers quartered with her. She lives in Harlem. The officer wanted to know all about my uncle who had fled to England. My grandmother gave him the information and calmly added, I'm proud of him. And do you know what? The officer looked at her and said, so would I be if I were in your place, and tore up the information. That's true, said Raina. The Germans know that people who love their country make good citizens. The land watchers can't win. They'll find in the end that they have no friends. They'll all be finished on Hatchet's Day, growled Ari. Hatchet's Day was the day Dutch people longed for, when they could take their revenge on their own countrymen who had betrayed them. Meanwhile, Joris joined Habel, Hans, and Hendrik. Hendrik was telling the other two boys about Freya. You should see her now, he boasted as if she were his own dog. Freya was expecting puppies, and Hendrik couldn't wait for them to be born. Oh, well, if we had kept her, we would have eaten her, said Hans, resigned. We ate our cat. Joris was shocked and felt fervently grateful that father had bought the pup for him. Imagine eating your friends. All the same, Hans and Habel must have been very hungry to do that, and he again noticed the pallor of their faces and their sunken cheeks. They were all starving, like they had really and truly, they had no food. The work on the dike was finished. The men had dug down to the ground. The president of the polder committee held up his hand, demanding attention. The crowd stopped chattering. We are now going to let the water into the Rheinerstadt polder, he said. This is a solemn moment. It is seldom that we voluntarily break a dike. I hope that we will each in our own way say a prayer for the success of this undertaking. There was some applause, but most people stood watching silently. Mr. Schneiderhans removed the closing plank from the cofferdam, and immediately the water came surging through, bending the board of the dam, filling the emptied space, finding the hole in the dike, and pouring the passionate seething swirls of the Rheinsader polder. So here is the picture, you guys. Look, don't forget, it takes a minute. There, can you see? See all the people looking around, looking at the dike and look how the house is underwater in the distance. Do you see that? So they have to get that water out of there so all their crops and everything, first of all, their crops don't die. Second of all, that their homes and everything don't stay underwater where they lose their homes and how to make a living, like how to live, all of it, when they've already lost so much because of the war going on. Okay, so that was chapter 18. So the next chapter, chapter 19, is called The Water Wolf. So I will see you guys when we read The Water Wolf.